Welcome to my lesson on how to write a film review. This is specifically geared towards my English 2 students, but I think might be useful for anyone else. What exactly is a film review? A film review is a judgment that is supported by an argument. That is where most of us fail to give appropriate reviews for just about anything, whether it's a movie or a book or a restaurant we go to. We do not make the arguments. We simply think that the judgment in and of itself should be fine. We all experience this. We walk up to a friend and ask, "How was the movie you watched last night?" And the response is, "It sucked. It was so boring." Or, "It was so cool." We rarely elaborate that much. I know my friends know me, my brother, my parents, my wife, my kid. They know what I like, and so if I say I like something, they probably know what the narrow range in which it is. Unless it's outside of my range, they don't need to ask much. We're all like that. But if you're writing a review, you assume that the reader does not know who you are or what your preferences are. Therefore, we make an argument. An argument, to steal from Monty Python, is a connected series of statements intended to establish a definite proposition. You are going to write a film review. You're going to make a judgment about the film. You'll need to develop some skills in working out an argument that will support your judgment. Generally speaking, there are 4 types of film reviews. There is the mixed positive. It has some issues, but it is worth seeing. There's the mixed negative. There may be some good qualities, but it is not really worth watching. The 4 general types of reviews then are the rave, the mixed positive, the mixed negative, and the pan. Star Wars. You may have heard of this film. It's also known as The New Hope, but not for anybody over 40. People over 40 know it as Star Wars. That's its name. If you know me or have been in my class, it's possible you have heard me mention it once or twice. Now, how would I write a review of Star Wars? The first step, and it sounds a little insultingly basic, but is watch the film. See, I've been grading student papers for over 20 years, and I often have read papers, reviews, analyses by students who've clearly not watched the film or read the book or read the short story or seen the play. Outline your essay. Notice here that I use 3 main points. The 5-paragraph structure is not an absolute, but it's a great tool to have in an academic utility belt. It can be manipulated to fit shorter essays and long papers. It's a very good thing to use. Pull it out of a hat if somebody hands you an essay question that you're not 100% prepared for. Expand your outline. Perhaps in the introduction, you'll give the information on the screen. The release date, who wrote it, who directed it, who started it, how important the film is. If you use a synopsis, as brief as possible. Do not use big spoilers. And a thesis statement that tells the reader what your overall judgment is and sets up the reasons. If you're writing at home, this is a great time to use IMDb or Wikipedia. If you're in a classroom situation, you might have a 3x5 card. If the teacher says no, then the teacher says no. That's it. But remember this. Even Roger Ebert, one of the great critics of the last 50 years, made notes. Expand on your outline. What are the 3 main points you're going to use? These 3 will be listed in that order, in or around the thesis statement in the intro, and in that order in the essay. In your conclusion, restate the main points and move towards a recommendation. Avoid statements like, I think this is a great movie. Try to avoid the first person as much as possible. Moreover, I think diminishes just about anything you're about to say. Explore the main points. I chose to discuss 3 main points: story, characters, actors, and visuals. There are certainly other aspects of a film and other aspects of a book that you can discuss. I limit myself to 3 to make a simple but complete argument. I'm not an expert in special effects. I might mention them, but I wouldn't hardly dwell on them. If a camera operator is so bad at framing that I pick up on it, the film would never be made. But I can make informed comments on story, characters and actors, and visuals. One of the aspects of Star Wars that is compelling is the simplicity of the story. It is easy to follow, but classic in its structure. It is the archetypal hero's journey that is familiar to just about any moviegoer. It is the monomyth in a galaxy far, far away. In an age where movies often seem like trailers for the next installment in a series, including the Star Wars series, and the average viewer needs a study guide to follow the intricacies of the plotting, Star Wars can be watched by anyone of any age with no foreknowledge. There are enough twists and turns to keep us guessing, but the filmmakers are not trying to trick us or confuse us. They are simply trying to entertain us. They succeed. Negative. One of the first things that leaps out at the viewer is that the story is overly simplistic. It comes across as little more than an outline of the hero's journey, slapped on the page with a few names added on for good measure. It lacks the profundity or the grace of The Lord of the Rings, though the story is essentially the same. Lucas might well have been trying to harken back to the action-adventure movies and serials of the 30s, but he apparently has not realized that his target audiences grew up in much more complicated ages and have evolved. At its best, Star Wars is little more than an exercise in nostalgia. Point 2. Luke, Han, Leia, Obi-Wan, and many of the others became icons almost immediately, and rightly so. In an age that wallows in the murky grays of morality, of right and wrong, of always trying to understand why the villain turned bad, Star Wars gives us black and white, good and bad, right and wrong. Han Solo, brilliantly played by Harrison Ford, may be a rogue, but the audience knows he has his heart in the right place. Mark Hamill's farm boy Luke is an everyman. He could be you or me. Perky Princess Leia is not only pretty, but strong and fearless. And Peter Cushing and the helmeted Darth Vader are certainly frightening foes. Carrie Fisher adds the glint of Hollywood royalty. Her parents are Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher. These 3, the central trio of Luke, Han, and Leia that moves the story forward, forms a team every bit as formidable and intriguing as Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. Alec Guinness as Luke's mentor and aged wizard Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Peter Cushing as the corrupt Grand Moff Tarkin bring in class and dignitas, while James Earl Jones, the voice of the villainous Darth Vader, could move an audience simply by reading a phone book. The droids, C-3PO and R2-D2, serve as a charming comic relief duo every bit as humorous and effective as Laurel and Hardy. It is said that casting is the director's most important job. In this case, Lucas got it right in a way even few good movies do. Negative. Almost as painfully simplistic as the story is the cast of characters that peoples Lucas's universe. Just about the best that could be said about them is that they are cliched. There's no depth to the characters and even less growth. Carrie Fisher is about as bland as someone can be and still be called a princess. She has Di's brains and Anne's looks, which makes us wonder why anyone would bother trying to rescue her. Mark Hamill has whining teen down pat. He complains about how bored he is with his life on the desert planet of Tatooine. We are even more bored with the 2 hours of our lives we have to spend with him on his journey of character stasis. Harrison Ford has spent the last 40 years of his career blaming Lucas's writing for the problems with his performance, instead of his acting coach, who apparently told Ford to sneer a lot. Alec Guinness, as the doddering Obi-Wan Kenobi, comes across as an actor who's simply in a movie for the paycheck. Guinness has since admitted that is indeed why he took the role. Obviously, they did not pay him very much. The droids C-3PO and R2-D2 are supposed to supply some comic relief. Unfortunately, they simply add to the running time. None of the characters grabs the audience. If they are like real people, then put some fake people on the screen. Barbie and Ken would be much more compelling characters, and probably have given more layered performances than those the viewer is left with. Point 3. Star Wars is one of the most visually interesting films out there. Lucas's universe is far from pristine and antiseptic. It looks like real life, but with spaceships and laser swords. The action scenes are undeniably exciting. The big climactic battle, inspired by classic World War II movies, alone is worth the price of admission. The big duel between Obi-Wan and his former student-turned-monster Darth Vader is graceful and balletic. It is not about fancy tricks, but a conflict between two wizards of great power. In an age where spectacle-driven films are loaded with busy and confusing effects, Star Wars embraces a simplicity that is far more interesting and enjoyable, and allows the visuals to help tell a story rather than overwhelm one. Negative. Lucas's visuals add little to the overall effect of the film. The middle of the film is dominated by a lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan and his one-time pupil Darth Vader. Unfortunately, there is no point during the duel that any member of the audience is concerned with the characters. Perhaps that is because it simply looks like they are tapping their weapons together. Perhaps they could not afford a stuntman to stand in for the clearly aging Alec Guinness. Sword fights should be exciting. This one is simply dull. The big climactic battle has its moments. Unfortunately, all of those, including the dialogue, were stolen from classic and better World War II movies. Star Wars wants to be a big FX film, but it does very little with its visuals. The film lacks any subtlety. We get it. The bad guys look like Nazis. The aliens look like guys in rubber masks. Princess Leia has really stupid-looking hair. This film is essentially a tease. It sets itself up as something really cool to watch, but in the end fails to pay off. Notice that I used more or less the same points to praise or trash the film. When you're assigned to write a review, or when you decide to write a review, for this matter, if you're doing it for a class, you'll probably have a finite amount of time to complete it. For my classes, I assign what the take is on the film: rave, mixed positive, mixed negative, or pan. They do not know until they open the assignment. A rave should likely have all the main points be positive, even glowing. A mixed positive would likely have one negative and two positive, or at least more positives than negatives. I recommend starting with the negative and moving towards the positive, and the mixed negative is flip the mixed positive. And a pan would likely have all the main points be negative, even scathing. For the introduction, you should anticipate your main points and general thrust of your argument. A lot of the information for the introduction will be the same whether you're writing a pan or a rave. It doesn't matter. Basic information is there. In May 1977 saw the release of one of the most influential and successful films in the history of cinema. Few, including creator, writer, director George Lucas, could have anticipated that Star Wars would take off how it did. This relatively simple movie, set in a faraway galaxy and heavily influenced by Kurosawa films, Flash Gordon serials, and World War II movies, follows the adventures of a farm boy, an old wizard, and two pirates as they infiltrate a planet-killing space station in an attempt at rescuing a princess who holds the key to bringing down an evil empire. Star Wars turned the film industry on its head, led to a cinematic universe that includes more than a dozen feature films, television shows, video games, books, and any number of games, toys, and other products. It started the careers of actors such as Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford, and it even starred classically trained actors such as Alec Guinness, Peter Cushing, and James Earl Jones. Star Wars has also inspired countless imitators, most of which are best forgotten. Whether you like the movie or dislike the movie, most of those points are hard to disagree with. But then you have to move in one direction or another. The rave. Star Wars is one of those movies that has appealed to a number of generations, justifiably so. Lucas's creation, which has captivated literally billions of imaginations, survives simply because, to put it bluntly, it is a great movie. Lucas has been able to combine a compelling story and unforgettable characters and made a thrilling visual and special effects-laden ride that should be a must on everyone's to-see list. Popularity, though, does not make a film good. If that were the case, Deep Throat would be one of the greatest films ever made. For all its influence, Star Wars is cobbled together using a hackneyed story, one-dimensional characters, and a visual style that is, at its worst, dull, and at its best, derivative. A conclusion is exactly that. You restate your main points and move towards a clear resolution. A rave? Star Wars has been around for 40 years. It has spawned prequels, sequels, television shows, and standalone films. Not to go into detail on other media incarnations. After all this time, it maintains its hold on the hearts and imaginations of its original audience, as well as succeeding generations. All Star Wars universe films, and most science fiction movies made since Star Wars was released, are held up to the 1977 film, which serves as the standard. Most of these films, even if they are good, fail in the comparison, for good reason. Star Wars is simply a great film. It succeeds on every level. It has a compelling story, iconic characters, and is an unforgettable, thrilling visual adventure. It is strongly recommended. Star Wars may indeed be one of the most popular films ever made. By now, though, 40 years after it was first released, it is certainly still being watched because of its pop cultural importance, rather than the quality of its storytelling. Considering that in the Star Wars film universe, episodes 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, and Solo, and do not forget the holiday special, and the Ewok movies, have sparked what is practically an industry of hatred and contempt. Perhaps viewers should look at the first film through the same lenses they used to judge its progeny. If they did, then Star Wars would certainly be recognized as the trash that it is. Your typical movie has to succeed on one of three levels. It must be a compelling story, it must be involve interesting characters, or it must be enjoyable to watch. Star Wars' story is hackneyed, its characters one-dimensional, and its visuals dull and derivative. It is not recommended. For a film review, whether it's written or done as a video, avoid overly casual language. Come across as professional. Avoid words like sucks and things like that. Avoid the first person as much as you get. Use it sparingly. Make it matter when at least you do use it. And avoid I think, I feel, and phrases like that. If you must, write them down, then delete them. Keep in mind, this is not a place to nitpick. By the way, I love nitpicking. I enjoy it so much. I strongly recommend the CinemaSins on YouTube. But there is a fine line between finding gross errors in a movie and allowing insignificant details to affect your viewing. Take, for example, Saving Private Ryan. I made up the first one. But this would be a wonderful thing to condemn. This movie clearly wants to be a realistic representation of what battle in World War II was like, specifically D-Day, June 6, 1944. The producers, however, do not seem to know much about the war, or history in general. D-Day happened in France, but there are clear shots of the Colosseum in the background. American units were not racially integrated, at least not on an organizational level. Arthur MacArthur was not the commander of Overlord. Douglas MacArthur, who at least fought in World War II, was not either, but that would have made more sense. The use of bikini-clad beach volleyball playing extras is never fully explained, nor is why the soldiers are all carrying muzzle-loading muskets. If that's the level of historical accuracy the filmmakers went to, especially since it was a major film made by a major director, you have the right to condemn it for that. But let's not get carried away. Believe it or not, this is an actual criticism of the film Saving Private Ryan. The lack of historical accuracy ruins the film. In one scene, one of the German soldiers was wearing a ribbon on his uniform that was not issued to the Wehrmacht until late 1944, several weeks after the events of the film. I cannot find the specific place where I found that anymore, but that is more or less what the critique was. Be fair. Most films are fairly upfront about what they are trying to do and what sort of audience they're looking for. It's nice if movies rise above that. But be fair to movies that succeed in doing what they're trying to do. That does not mean you have to like it. There are plenty of films I would recommend that I don't like, depending on who I'm recommending it to. And there are plenty of movies that I love that I probably wouldn't recommend to people. And again, with the being fair, I remember seeing a review a number of years ago where Roper of Ebert and Roper was trashing Curious George by saying it was juvenile, written for 4-year-olds. And Roger Ebert said, but it was written for 4-year-olds and it works quite nicely. And I agree with him. Roper was trying to judge it by comparing it to Pixar or whatever, and it wasn't trying to be Pixar, it was trying to be Curious George. My wife and I used to argue over the film My Date with the President's Daughter. She thought it was garbage. I thought it charming. It wasn't trying to be Hamlet. It was trying to be a Disney film. Not even a film, a Disney TV film. It was trying to be 90 minutes of pleasant, saccharine fun, and it worked quite nicely. It was a charming movie. I hope that this model will help you write a fairly straightforward film review. There are all sorts of other ways to write film reviews, and if you know them or want to use them or want to try them, by all means. Many film reviews are much more analytical. Many explore the themes and nuances of the film. A lot of people, if they were getting into an in-depth review of Star Wars, for example, would go into comparing and contrasting the different films, the different iterations of the characters, notes George Lucas might have made, commentary from actors, and that's fine. But I'm one of those people who tends to believe that a film sort of exists on its own and should be judged on its own, regardless of its past influences or future influences. And in the case of an in-class review, you have a time limit. Again, watch the film if you can make a review for the film. Watch it. If you're in my class, you may choose a book that we read for class. A general rubric for writing a film review: clear organization, strong thesis, strong and distinct points, demonstrated understanding of the work to be reviewed, use of examples from the work, clarity and sophistication of language.